So, guys, let's begin. So, today for the course, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be covering the fundamentals of React, what React is, why we use it, what's the point of using it, and especially React is a very useful skill to learn at this point in time because the demand for React is increasing by a very quick rate in the industry, even especially in the US market, in the Pakistani market, all over the world, because of the fact that it's such an easy to use language slash library that allows you to make very responsive, very quick, very animated applications in a very small amount of time. सही है तो अगर आप लोगों को मेरा स्क्रीन देखे ज़रा सा तो what I'm going to start off with is I'm going to start off with having you guys basically make a very simple React app. So I'd want you all to kind of code side by side with me because I'm going to go through the exact instructions you would need. And if you code side by side, you can actually fix the errors that you encounter in real time, which is going to be very helpful for all of you because in the initial stages, you're going to run into a lot of errors. Okay. I'm going to assume that by this time, you all have NPM installed because in the previous 4 sessions, they all required NPM. It would kind of be pointless to repeat that the whole process again. So I'm going to go with that assumption. Okay, once assuming that you've installed npm, I'll just go to the screen 1 second, and you can let's go to the React website to show you an example of what basically React is. React is a component-based language system. What do you mean when you say component-based? Well, for all libraries and languages have some key theme with which they operate. For Java, for example, it's object-oriented programming. React also allows object-oriented programming, but the main theme of React is that you use smaller components or bits and pieces and you join them together to make larger structures, larger applications. So, for example, you might make a button, or you might make a navigation bar, or a footer, or an icon, and then you can use that icon or whatever wherever you want to use it. Right. So, what we're going to start off right now is make our own app for the first time, and a React app. And the interesting thing is you can make it within 5 minutes. So you can actually have a working application within 5 minutes. It's called the Create React app, right? So I can actually show you guys a link so you can actually follow it in real time. If you want to follow the link, I'm also going to do it side by side, just in case any one of you wants to see it. I've sent the link on the chat of this channel, so you can actually see the exact commands as written by it, right? The first thing you'd have to do for this is it's very simple. It's a bunch of basic commands. And the first command is called npx create react app, whatever the name of your app is. So create react app is the keyword here for creating an app. If you mess this up, it's going to cause problems. npx is an alternative to npm. npm is Node Package Manager that manages all of the packages you might have. So it's responsible for downloading, and I'm talking about npm right now, right? npm is responsible for downloading and managing, updating all the packages that Node might have. For example, Express, React, Axios, all of these things. Uh, npx is responsible for executing things, right? So instead of just there's a downloader and then there's an executor. So that's a core difference between npx and npm. So npx create react app and whatever the name of the app you want. So in this case, they used the word my app. I used an example app, right, in my case. So for example, if you can see my screen, I've had a React app just made already, but I'm going to make a new one for you guys just to demonstrate exactly how this works. So the first thing you have to do is you want to go in our folders, and where you want to create this app. So here, okay. By the way, guys, can you see my screen just to verify that it's actually working? Yeah, could you close the door? Hello, guys. Could you just let me know if I can see if you guys can see my screen, just because.
Yeah, we can see it. Go ahead.
ठीक है, तो हम पहला काम ये करेंगे कि हम एक नया फोल्डर बनाएंगे. आप किसी भी लाइब्रेरी वगैरह के जाएं, ठीक है, जहाँ पर अपनी ऐप रखते हैं और आप एक नया फोल्डर क्रिएट करते हैं. So I'll call this GDSC, right? Because we're creating an app just for this. Then what you want to do is you kind of want to open this from VS Code. VS Code is my preferred coder of choice. You guys can choose anyone that you want, but VS Code is generally a pretty good choice for React coding. Right, so I'm going to create a new window for this. Let me just delete this. Actually, let me just delete this window. Create a new window for this. Okay, and you want to open your folder, right? I use Command O. You can just go to File, Open Folder. सही है, इसके अंदर navigate to the new folder you just created, right? This is going to act as the home directory of whatever app you place in, right? So whatever files it's going to create, it's going to create in this folder. That's why it's a good idea to create a separate folder. Otherwise, it's going to create, it might litter those files in the existing folder that you already have, right? So if you open this, now what you want to do is you want to go to your terminal, right? In case any of you don't know, the terminal can be accessed from over here, right? You can just click on this, and it's going to open a new terminal, right? So then you want to use the instructions that were given in the link that I provided earlier on, right? npx create React app. So I'm just going to copy this instead of typing down the whole thing. And instead of writing my app, you want to write down the name of whatever app you want to use. So I'm just call it BDSC example. All right. So I'm just going to create an app called GDSC example within the folder called GDSC, right? And just press enter. Oh, it can't contain capital letters, my bad. Let's just call it GDSC example. Right. So now the first thing it's going to do is it's going to tell you that it's creating a new React app, and it's going to show you the packages that's going to install. It's going to say it's going to install. It actually individually downloads the packages required within each file that you want to choose, within each folder that you place it in. So for example, if on the same machine you had 5 different folders, you can actually have different versions of React in each folder because it installs the React library in each folder that you want to use. That's why it says that you're installing packages, because it replicates it. This is very useful if you have multiple versions of React, because you don't have to globally install it. It's going to be on every individual folder. So we're just going to wait for this to complete. Depending on your machine and your download speeds, it might take different times. So, all right. So it's created a React app, and we can see that because the folder which was previously empty, GDSC example, now has a lot of things within it, right? And just to go over what exactly these things are, starting from the top, node modules are basically all the dependencies that React uses. So for example, React uses whatever compilers and Babel, etc., things that it uses to compile its code. Right. So if you ever have anything that you install as a library, you can find it over here. Right. You can see all of these modules. There's ESLint over here. You can also find the React modules themselves over here. If you look, so for example, React.js, React scripts, React refresh, and a lot of the problems you might have later on it might have involvement with these. That's why it's a good idea to know what this is. Public is a thing that is basically the place where you might want to put things that are open to anyone to see because they're assets to the code, right? So for example, images, etc., or overall text or logos, you can place in the public folder. Then the main folder you're going to have is the SRC. But before you go to the SRC folders, this is called source folder. Let's just go a bit over what these 4 things are at the bottom. So the git ignore folder is basically useful for very useful for source control. What source control means is, I'm assuming that you guys don't have an idea, is that when you code, a lot of times when you code, if you don't have any source control mechanism like Git or Mercurial, what you're going to do is you're going to be coding on one machine, and then if that machine just dies or something, all that code is lost because it wasn't saved anywhere. Secondly, if you're coding and you don't have any way to save your code within multiple versions, it's very problematic because, for example, suppose your code was working 5 minutes ago. You made one change, and then for some reason, the undo feature isn't working. Now your code is at a state where you cannot go to the previous state that it was, right? So this is where source control comes in. That's what Git is for, which is this tab over here. It's going to show you the branch you're on now. It allows you to publish the branch to GitHub, and then you can also see the commits over here. Like over here, you can see the commits. You can add commits. Currently, there are no changes, but once you add the changes, you can add them and then publish them. So, for example, in my case, if I could say, if I just said initialized app, right, it's going to allow you to basically you can just say that within the starting thing, publish the branch with this initial commit. And if you click on publish branch, it's going to show you an option to publish to a GitHub repository. For this, obviously, if you don't have GitHub, an account in GitHub, it would require you to make one. I would highly request you make one. GitHub is industry standard for source control, and all of coding will be done on GitHub. That's the way your code is merged. That's the way your code is combined. That's the way that your sources are maintained, so that if any of your machine stops working suddenly, your code is all safe for you and your team. Later on, you're going to need this on industrial level, so I'd highly recommend you all at least have a basic understanding of what it does, right? So I'm going to just click on publish to GitHub public repository, and you can see that's going to start publishing it. I would recommend that you guys do this side by side. And if you have any errors, just type it on the console that we have on the Google Meet. And now if you click on open on GitHub, you can see that my entire code is actually hosted online. And the amazing thing about this is, and you guys can try it, is I can just send you guys a link to this, and then all of you have access to the code that I just made. All of you can use it, you can download it, you can run it on your machine, you can see what it is, and you can fork it. Forking basically means that you can make a copy of it and start running it as your own code. So it's a very useful way for people to collaborate. It allows code to be very, very, how would you say, mobile, right? It's not stuck in any one place. So okay, so now the second thing, right? So that's done. So now if you go back to what git ignore basically does is there are certain files that you wouldn't want to have on Git. It's a bit more of a complex thing. So that's what git ignore is for, right? So things like node modules, which you wouldn't want to upload because it's a very big file, is going to be placed in git ignore. Package lock and package JSON are pretty important files. Package JSON is basically refers to all the files. This is going to have your initial configurations, right? So for example, if you want to start your React app, you're going to write npm start, and that's because your program knows that going to these scripts, and whenever the person writes npm with one of these things, it automatically runs this command. So it's basically an initializer for your React app, and all your libraries, etc., will go over here. So React library, React DOM. Anytime you want to update something, and each time you want to update something or you want to make a change to something, it's going to automatically make a change to package.json, which is why it's a good idea that if you're working with multiple people in a team, you might have conflicts because different people might have different package.json files. One package.json file might have React 15.2.0. So if you update your code, it might not work on your machine, which is updating on your friend's machine, because the package.json file is different. That's why ideally a team should have a shared package.json or package lock.json file. It would allow the code to go around easily. Or certain things might break in someone's computer and they might break in someone else. Okay, the difference between package.json for package.json and package-lock.json is package.json allows variable versions. So basically above 18.2 means any version that is above 18.2 is a valid version for this. So if you do npm install, which is basically the way you update all your libraries, it's in a command over here. You can just npm install, right? That's basically going to, I can just run it right now just to show you guys. If you're going to, you can see it says up to date or 309 packages. It basically goes through your entire package.json file and sees if everything is up to date, everything needs to be installed, etc., etc. The difference between the package-log file is that it's basically a screenshot or a replica of a state of a code at a given time. That's why it's so long, as you can clearly see, because it's got everything at a specific version that needs to be. So if, for example, if a code is working over here, and if you send the package-log to someone else, it's going to work on their end too. All right. Now let's go to the React app itself and see what the components of the React app is. So this is the main thing of what you'll be doing, right? By the way, if any of you like this theme and you guys want to put it, this is just something extra. There's an extension called Material Theme, and basically it's basically a very pretty theme. It's called Material Icon Theme. Sorry, this extension that looks like this. I'll actually write down this for you guys if you guys want to have this extension. That basically makes this whole thing very aesthetic. Right. Okay. So let's go back to this. So your main file is going. You want to start off with the index the app.js file, right? The app.js file is basically going to have the core home page of your app, right? So as you can see over here, it's importing the app, the CSS file. It's a function. Okay, and then you'll be wondering why is this a function? I'll get to that very short in a while. But as you can see, it's a function that's not taking any arguments and it's returning a single expression. Now, we want to start off with talking about what exactly this expression is. So this is kind of where React differentiates from HTML, is because the reason why HTML kind of ran out as a language was that HTML had static tags. So for example, if you have a single page, you would just write HTML fala fala jo bhi aap likhenge, tag number 1, tag number 2, and would just have some very static things that cannot be changed. If you want to change something, it's very difficult to add variables to it. It's very difficult to. You're basically making static websites, things that are clickable but don't have a lot of interactivity to them because they're designed to be made with a single piece of code that doesn't have a lot of variables, that doesn't have a lot of functions. It's just kind of there. It's just a structure, an HTML structure that exists. React changed that by one revolutionary thing, which is called JSX. JSX basically means JavaScript HTML, right? And what it essentially did is it said, let's take all of that static HTML tags, which are like divs and A's, for links, and you have you have headers and you have the body tags, you have the p tag for the paragraph. And said, let's take all of those tags and let's make them dynamic. So instead of them being just kind of there on the code, let's make them returnable as function objects. So now instead of it kind of being static there on the code, it becomes a returnable object that you can actually call from anywhere. So the beauty of this is if you make an entire HTML page and let's say you want to replicate the whole page, how would you do it? You're going to press Ctrl C and then press Ctrl V, right? You're just going to write the code and double it. But JSX said, no, let's not do that. How about we actually store the entire HTML as a variable, and then you can call that variable whenever you want. And the best part of this is that makes things reusable. You took a certain piece and you just said, I can reuse this whenever I want to. But you do have to understand that at its root, this is HTML. It just allows JavaScript to use it and makes it dynamic. This is essentially what React does. This is essentially what React functions as. Right. So it's going to return this, and as you can see, this object over this bracket over here is to tell you, okay, this entire thing is one object. You're treating this whole thing as a single object. This is not HTML. This is JSX. There's a very big difference between HTML and JSX. HTML
Hey,
would not.
Brahmi, I think your screen has stopped sharing, so can you do that again?
Sure. I'll share it again. Thank you for pointing it out. How long was it not sharing
Yeah,
for?
yeah, it's just 2 minutes ago. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah. So yeah. This is a basic function app, and just to see the beauty of what React already did is that we just installed everything, and I hopefully you guys installed it on your machine as well. Um, is Ibrahim's screen visible to anyone? Oh, my bad. I didn't see it. Okay, so now once you have this app as a basic, let's see what it does. Let's see what it looks like, what it can do. So what we're going to do is we're just going to write npm start. This is the basic command that you're going to need to remember for ever starting a React app. It's npm start. I'll write it over here so you guys can copy it. If you guys want to start, if you guys want to run the app on your end. And what npm start is going to do is it's going to launch that app and actually make it run on your machine, right? So, okay, so this is actually a very common error. I'll just point this out. Is if you guys get this error which says missing script start, do you mean one of these? This usually happens because when you write npm start, you have to ensure that you're in the exact folder where your React application was installed. So even though I'm in GDSC, the React application itself created its own folder called GDSC example, if you guys remember. So this, if you get this error, you might get stuck on this. But so the easiest way is you just press CD, right? Which basically means change the directory. And you want to press tab, and it's going to show you the directory that you can change to. So in this case, you want to kind of go to the GDSC example directory. And now once you're in GDSC example, you can just do npm start, right? And now it won't have a problem. All right. Okay, so now if you can see my screen, you first just appreciate the beauty of React, how aesthetic it is as a language. Right, that's what React is built for, aestheticism, right? And I'll just show you how easy it is. If you want to make a change to the React app, it's very easy. Just go to this, because the whole thing is running side by side. It actually runs on your entire network. So anyone who has access to your home network can actually see it on their app. It's very useful to show your siblings what you're up to. And what you're going to do now is, it shows edit src app and save to reload, right? So it's basically showing you this piece of text. And wouldn't it be awesome if you could just change this text and start working on this app straight away, instead of figuring out how complex it is? Well, yeah, you can do that, because if you go over here, edit, go back to the. So if you go over here and you see on this line, you can see that there's the edit piece of the code that's being run over here can actually be seen over here within the paragraph tab. So if you can just change this, so instead of this, let's call it, let's add something else. Let's just say, wow, this actually works. This actually works, right? And you press Command S, and Command S is going to save it, and it's automatically going to update the app, right? So if you go back over here, you see how this actually updated in real time. And this is actually very, very useful, because any change you make is going to appear in real time. And for example, if you just change this back to any other thing, if you want to add if you want to add another tab, right? Let's just copy this and paste it over here. And you can see clearly how the moment you save it, it's just going to actually add this new paragraph that you just added over here. So this is exactly what a Create React app does. It allows you to dynamically load the page in real time, right? Okay, so that's the first thing. Now what you want to do is you want to move on to exactly what components are in React. So just to demonstrate exactly what components are, what you guys want, to start off with, for example, right now they're currently using things like div, right? But now, for example, let's suppose you wanted to create your own custom component in React. So React allows you to do this very easily. And the way you do that is, okay, I'll just introduce you guys to what components basically are. Let me show you from the official React app, what exactly a component looks like. So this is what a component kind of used to look like before. It says class hello message extends React component. Ignore the jargon for now. But basically, to understand what this is saying that let's take all of this piece of code and let's make it one chunk, so that I can use this chunk whenever I want to. That's what a component essentially is. And there are two kinds of components. There's class-based components and there are functional components. They both do the exact same thing. They're just written in different senses. Class components were the previous way of doing it, and excuse me. And then functional components are the new way of doing it, because they allow you. They're much faster. They're easier to use. And they're based on functions that everyone understands very easily. Right. So let's start coding a single component, and I'll show you guys how exactly it works. Right. So for example, actually, if I can open the components page, you guys can actually have a functional components in React. Components in React. So I can give you guys the exact link. No, components and props. Yeah, just give you guys this. So this is basically the React app. The React homepage is the best place for. Thank you. The React docs is basically the best place for this to for you to see any documentation. And I'm just sending this to you guys because anytime you guys run into any errors over here, your best friend is the React homepage. It's React.js/docs. It's basically all the React documentation. Anytime you get stuck, anything you have to check is going to be over here, like for the main things. It won't have your errors in them, but it's going to have how to write the correct syntax. Right, so this is an example of what a functional component looks like, right? It's the right function, that's a keyword because you're writing a function. You're going to write the name of the function. Keep in mind this has to be in capitals. Right, so let me just show you how it would look like. So let's make a new function. Let's call it button component. Button component, right? Net, right? And then you just open it up, right? And what you want to do now is every component has to have one very important thing in React, and that is a return function. Because the whole point of a component in React is that it's going to return a JSX expression, right? That's very important. A component returns a JSX expression. So it's kind of like imagine you made a chunk of data and you said, okay, return this entire HTML chunk of data whenever I call this function component. It's very much similar to function of like instead of writing the HTML code statically, you said, let me place this entire HTML within a function, and that function can return me that HTML whenever I want to, right? But so it has to return to you something. So that's why you're going to write the return statement, and then within the return statement, you can write whatever you want to write. So let's suppose you write a paragraph and you write my name, right, etc. Now, this is how simple it is to create a React component. And now the best thing is this React component can be used wherever you want to. So now instead of these lines over here, how about we add this component that we just created ourselves? And so what you're going to do is you're going to open the tag because this component, this is the syntax for this. And you can see the button component thing coming up. And this basically, this component is now already here. All right, that's how easy it was to add it to your main page. And so if you go to your app, you can actually see that my name, this thing we just added, is already here. And right now I'm keeping things very simple. I'm just writing down text. Later on, you're going to be adding a lot of things to these components, things like buttons, images, forms, etc., which I'm going to show you guys shortly in the next few sessions. This session is I'm going to try to keep things a little basic so you guys don't get overwhelmed. But yeah, so this is basically what essentially a component does. Now, let's suppose in this component, let me just change some things for this component. If a component does not need an opening and closing tag, you can just write slash instead of doubling the whole thing, right? Now, let's suppose you wanted to make this component. You said, okay, this is cool, but this component doesn't actually allow me to write in the changes that I want to write within the app. So if the component over here is static, it's just going to write my name every single time. If I'm calling it from somewhere else, it's just going to write my name. Wouldn't it be awesome if I could write whatever I wanted to from wherever I wanted to? This is where props come in for a function component. And props is basically a short form of properties. You can see exactly what props looks like over here. This is what props is. Okay, it stands for properties. And basically what it's saying is when you create a component, you can pass in properties to that component to determine its behavior in different circumstances. This is very, very useful in a lot of scenarios. Because if you're returning HTML, whole HTML tags, what's the whole point of returning them if you're just returning the same thing every single time? No, we want to make them dynamic. So what you can have is, for example, you can enter the color red, and instead of returning the same blue text every time or black text every time, it's going to return red text just based on a single property change. Unlike HTML, where you have to go to the CSS, where you have to go to the styling and change all of that, React allows you to do that in a single line. And we'll see that right in a moment here. Let's go over here, props. Let's write props over here. And over here, we're just going to write props dot name. Okay, now what this is basically going to say, this is essentially saying, for this function component, whenever it is called, if you pass in any props, what you return should be based on the name property, the name attribute of the property, right? And so just to demonstrate how that looks like over here is this button component is over here. It's not passing any properties at the moment. So now it might cause problems sometimes in your page because it's basically saying nothing's been passed here. So you press Command S. Okay, so it's returning props.name over here because you have to, oh yeah, this is something very important. Because HTML, the way HTML works is any text you write is typically text. So if you write props.name over here, it's going to treat the whole thing as text. This might lead to a lot of errors and confusion later on for a lot of you. So keep in mind that this is the reason why it's showing props.name over here, because it's treating this entire thing as text. It's not treating it as an actual JavaScript dynamic variable, right? And if you want to make it dynamic, what you're going to do is just going to surround it within curly brackets. It's going to take 1 second. You surround the whole thing within curly brackets. And now, if you save the whole thing again, well, right now you didn't pass in anything. So let's just pass in name is equals to, I'll just type my name, Ibrahim, right? Right? And now what we're gonna do is you go over here and you see, wow, look at that. The name is over here, right? And the reason why this is, you might think, okay, this seems pretty straightforward, but the important thing you have to understand was this component was, this part was disconnected from this part. They can be in completely different pages of the application, and that you can have this current piece have a variable that changes that fundamental component. That's the beauty of components. They're malleable, they're dynamic. They can change over time, just based on a different variable being entered within them, right? So let me just refactor this 1 second because I call it component instead of. Let me need simple component. Okay. All right, so we've got this going on, and you can see, so any time, and the interesting thing is you're gonna have as many props as you want. So for example, if you return a single thing as this, let's suppose you want to return something else, you can return props dot id, and then you're going to have to pass the id over here. Pass in 100, and now it's going to write Ibrahim 100, right? So the whole point of this to show this is to show that the way this works is that these are properties. These are properties, and if you highlight them, it shows you property, name, string, and what it's going to do is it's going to pass this property. This is the key. These are called key value pairs, by the way. This is the key, and this is the value of that property. It's going to take the key of this value, the key of this property, and alongside the value of this property, it's going to pass that to the button component, which is a function. So you can kind of think of it as sending inputs to a function. That's essentially what it's doing. It's sending inputs to a function, and it's very similar to the way HTML works, because HTML also has attributes, but HTML attributes are slightly different because they don't work as they don't work exactly as components. So anyway, so now you have your basic React setup, and you can use components. So we'll talk a bit more about how props work, and I'm just gonna go a bit. Oh, we're going to do hooks, etc., which is how component lifecycle methods. Because the reason why React can, like for example, if you change this ID to 8, and you go over here, press Command S, which basically saves it, you can see it changed to 8 in real time. That's how fast this app remade itself. In HTML, this would take ages. You would have to go back, you'd have to change the file, you'd have to save it, you have to make a new copy of it, you have to go back over here and run the page again. Extremely tedious. React does this all in 1 second. Right. So now let's go on to a bit more complexity. Let me give you guys a couple of extensions to make your React work really easy. I would highly recommend you guys have these extensions. They're going to make things a lot easier for you. I'll actually write them down side by side so you guys can see what's happening. One is called auto import, right? And basically what auto import, it's going to show these extensions side by side. This extension, what it's going to do is basically any import that you might have, it's going to find a possibility of it and give the options in your console, in your window in real time. For example, I use material grid a lot, and so for example, if you have grid, canvas grid, you see it showed these things that you can import, and when you click on them, it's going to automatically import them and add them to your app, and it's extremely useful. I would highly recommend it to you guys. Let me just write this down so you guys. These are things that will save you time later on, even though you won't realize it right now. And it's the reason why I can do these things quickly, because these things are already installed. Okay, so there's auto import. Then you want to have git length. Git length is extremely useful. What git length basically does is you have what is called source control, right? So if you have a project where multiple people are working, and I can actually show you an example of this. Just give me a second. Actually, I'll show you an example of this. File new window, file open recent web dev carpool. So this is a project in which I'm working with some friends of mine. And if you enable git length with this, enabled, right? So over here, you can see over in the source control tab, you can basically see what all the repositories are, what all the commits are, what any other member has done. So for example, let's say I have a friend and I want to see what he's been up to. You can just go to his commits and you can see, okay, this guy's, he had these files, fana, 3 weeks ago. And you can click on the file and it shows the file on the left, on the right, right? And it's extremely useful, especially when you're working with larger teams. Right now, you might be working as individuals. Later on, you might want to look at someone else's code. You might want to have a peek at someone else's repository. So it's extremely useful for that. You can just do it within your terminal. You can copy code. You can edit code. Extremely useful. It's called GitLens. I would recommend you guys download this. Okay, the next one I'd recommend you do is, let me just have a look, is error lens. And but before we talk about error lens, let's talk a bit about ESLint and what linting is for React. So for React, when you have these files later on, you're going to realize that certain things you do are not according to conventions you might want to have them. So for example, I have my linter enabled over here, and if you add, for example, a couple of spaces over here, it's actually going to give you an error. And the reason it's going to give you an error is I have a linter enabled that actually checks your code and ensures that the code you do has to follow a specific format very strictly, that if it doesn't follow, it's going to give errors. And the reason why this is so amazing is because you can actually format this linter so that every time you save, it automatically corrects all your formatting. So for imagine you were writing down a bunch of code, it got really dirty because it's difficult to clean code. And so you have all of this, and like this, and your code is extremely dirty, full of errors, etc. You can just press Command S. Everything's resolved in 1 second. It reformats the whole thing. It cleans up your code. It cleans up all the unnecessary lines and stuff automatically. So I would highly recommend you guys have this. It's called ESLint. It's going to make formatting a breeze for you guys. So yeah, so that's ESLint. Okay, we've got this. Okay, now the next one we want to talk about is error lens. I'm going to talk about error lens, this next extension. So for example, imagine you're working on a code and you run into an error, right? You call this. It's, for example, button component is not defined, right? Now, if you didn't have this extension, let me show you what would happen if you didn't have this extension. Error lens. Let's just disable it for 1 second. Not required. Now, currently you have an error. You have an error in your file, but it's not showing you what the error is. It's kind of tedious to look at the error. And imagine if you had multiple errors in your file, like for example, let's do something over here. Let's call it return. Let's put something in front of return, right? And let's put something over here, right? Now you see you got a bunch of errors in your file. You don't know why the errors are there. So how do you see all the errors? You go over them individually. You see, oh wow, oh this is the error, NS is not defined. I have to just remove this over here. This is the error, that component is not defined, and this is the error over here. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could see all the errors in line, so you don't have to actually hover over them and wait for a second before they actually show you? Error lens does exactly that, and you can see that in a second if I enable this, and you go back to this, you can see all the errors are within the same line. So you can see, oh, okay, that's not defined. Let's just remove this. Here, button component is not defined. So that means that I made a spelling mistake. I've got app is not defined. So that means I probably made a spelling mistake over here and it's resolved. So it basically allows you to accelerate the pace at which you work, right? So I would highly recommend this. It's called Error Lens. It's going to make your life a lot easier when you start coding. And okay, so we've got this. Let me see any other extensions that I might recommend you guys. Okay, we've got snippets. So snippets are pieces of code that you might have to use, that you might want to use repeatedly. So for example, if you want to create a component over here, you might just write functional component, right? Functional component, and no, functional, whatever the name of the component is with the whole thing. Or you can just write, there's a shortcut for this, or function statement. And you see how you just wrote this thing and made a whole thing for you. And you can just write my component, right? right? And then you can write the props, and then you can write whatever you want to write within this. So it basically allowed you to quick type anything. These are basically what snippets are. So even for like for each, so if you imagine you want to write a for each loop, it's very tedious to write for each, etc. You just write for each, and basically makes a for each loop for you. You write a for in for loop. It makes a whole for loop for you within 1 second. It's really really useful. So yeah, I would just recommend Snake. But some of these are pre-installed. Some of this are within the React bundle. Okay, the next is are things that you might use but not a lot. There's there's a Node.js models IntelliSense. This is going to be very useful for you guys later on. The IntelliSense things, because basically IntelliSense basically means that when you're writing something, you might have to remember what you want to write, right? So for example, if you're writing a function, a component, if it wasn't here, it would be pretty hard to write it. But I can just write function and then button component, etc., 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 and just very quickly write because of this thing called IntelliSense. So these things add path IntelliSense to your whatever you're writing. So if you have something within your node module like React, you can just do import React and just import the whole thing from itself, right? Which is super useful. That's what Node.js modules IntelliSense will do. Let me just write that down. It's going to be npm IntelliSense. And then you have Node.js modules IntelliSense. What's that? Modules IntelliSense, right? Modules IntelliSense, right? So we've got that, and we've got okay, we've got path IntelliSense. What path IntelliSense will basically allow you to do is if you have different uh, paths within your thing, and suppose you want to navigate to something which is in a different directory. Normally, you just have to write down the whole directory itself. You don't have path IntelliSense. But what path IntelliSense allows you to do is it's just going to suggest the whole path to anything. So you can basically navigate within your code, right? So you can just go to, oh, I want to go to this fana CSS file, and I want to import it. And this is very useful, especially when you're multiple layers deep and you don't remember what you have. So it allows you to basically access anything you want. Super useful. I would highly recommend it. We've got that. Let me just write that down. Path IntelliSense. Path IntelliSense. All right. Then we come to this thing called Glean. Glean is extremely useful. What Glean allows you to do is it basically allows you to take pieces of code that you have and convert them to functional components directly. So imagine now you had this thing, you had this piece of code said, wow, this actually works. Imagine you wanted to convert this into an entire component, which you're going to have to do a lot in React, because React is all about reusability. And so what you would do is you would have to copy this code, go over here, write function, new component, and you write the props, and you write this, and you copy this over here, etc., and then you have to delete it over there. It's a pretty long process, right? What Clean basically allows you to do is you can just highlight this whole thing. You can go over here, and you can extract component, and you can write the name of your component. You can say new component, and voila, it's extracted it automatically. It's pasted over here. It's created the component over here, and everything's working. So yeah, that's basically it. This is what Glean does for you. It's extremely useful. Let's just undo that because we don't need it anymore, right? It's extremely useful. So let me just write that down. Glean, Glean. Okay. Um, and what else do we have? Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's basically most of them. There's if you guys have done APIs, okay, there's one very useful one that I like to use called Turbo Console Log, and you're going to be using this a lot when you actually have projects that have a lot of dynamic things. Let me show you like a project that I'm actually working on, right? So within this project, for example, we've got some errors over here. We don't know why they're happening. You might want to see something and figure out why it's giving an error. So, for example, if you go over here and the login, you go to the function, and let's go to this function. Let's suppose you want to figure out why this variable is giving an error at this specific place. So you can just write down whatever the name of this variable is. Let's suppose the name of this variable is called doctor, right? And then you will just write this shortcut, and basically allows you to just it just makes the entire error for you. So you don't actually have to write console.log, console.log, doctor, line, something to know exactly why it happened. You just write the name of the variable and press this shortcut. Shortcut is command, it's Control Option L, which is written over there. So it's extremely useful. I'd highly recommend you guys use it. So I'll just turbo console log. Let me write it down. Turbo console log. Okay. Turbo console log. These are things that are not essentially a part of React, but you guys actually code in React. It's going to make your life a lot easier the moment you start using it. And you're going to find out that a lot of problems you have later on, you won't have these. That's why I'm giving you these things earlier on. They're not necessary, but they're just going to make your life a lot easier. Right? So what else do we have? We have ESLint. All right, we've got Glean. Okay, if you guys want to use MongoDB and you guys connected to the database, there's a very cool extension MongoDB for VS Code, which basically allows you to see your entire database within your code. For example, I can see the elements of the database by just clicking on it, and then I can see whichever elements it has. I can go to test, okay, admin users. Oh, I can see every single document. You have this document, double click it. So it's basically you don't have to access your database separately. You can actually just see it over here. You can make changes to it. Very useful if you're working on Mongo. So I'd recommend it. It's called MongoDB. Just called that for VS Code, basically. Yeah. So you got that. What else do we have? This is a very cool extension called LiveShare that I would highly recommend you guys use. Basically, what LiveShare does is it allows anyone to access your machine and make changes directly on your machine. So this is very useful if you have a small error that someone's trying to fix, because it allows them to work on your machine directly from their computer. So if you guys run into an error, you can just set up a live share session, send me the link, and I can actually work on your machine from my home and fix that error in real time. It's extremely useful if you have small errors that can be fixed. If you want someone to view your code and tell you what mistakes are in it, extremely useful for that. So I would recommend that you use that too. And that's basically about it for extensions. So that's kind of it. Those are the main ones I use. A lot of other ones, but they're not necessary. All right, so let me just undo the changes I just did. But to wrap up today's class, I'm just going to talk a bit about some common errors that you might run into React. One of the errors is that as you're writing React, if you don't import the correct things, it's going to say something like, for example, if you in Material UI, if you want to use Material UI and you want to use a grid component, which is part of a Material UI, it's going to say grid is not defined. What grid is not defined usually refers to is the fact that this component does not exist within the current scope. That means you either haven't imported it or it doesn't exist. So for example, if you want to use the grid component, you want to use Material UI, you'd have to go to your terminal and you have to do npm install, right? If you do material table or whatever material extension you want to have, and it's just going to install the whole thing, and then you can import it over here and use it. That's how you're going to be doing all of your installations. So for example, the most commonly used library, like an alternate to Bootstrap, is called Material UI. I'm sure you guys have heard of this. It has a lot of pre-made components that you can use. So let me just show you how to install that, because you might be using for the next class a Material UI React. So this is essentially the library. And if you want to get started, so it gives you the instruction that you want to install beforehand very easily. And if you go back to your console, just write, just copy the instructions, npm install material, MUI material, emotion is a styling guide. You press enter. It's going to start installing the whole thing. So any library you guys want to install, if you ever think about, oh, how to install this, it's very easy. You go to the library page and it's going to have an instruction, npm fanafala, how to install this. and just write those instructions down within your terminal, within the same directory. Ensure you're in the same directory. If you're in a different directory, it will not work. This is one of the very common errors people make, is that they start working in a different directory. So if you did cd something else and then start working with it, would cause errors. So right now, hopefully, I've done it in the right directory. And if you have material, if you have grid, I believe I have done it in the wrong directory. Exactly what I was saying. Okay, yeah, now it's port grid, grid, grid from material GUI. So yeah, so basically installed it, and now once material UI is installed, if you go back to your, if you go to your package, if you see the changes that are there, you're going to see that in package.json, it's added these libraries to it, right? And this is because it installed them and added them, and then you can just import them and start using them, right? That's essentially how you use this. So let me just remove this for now. Okay. That's how we're going to use some of the libraries we're going to use for the next couple of sessions that you guys might want to install beforehand. But I'm going to show you guys how to install them. Are Axios. So for that, you're going to have to do npm install Axios, right? And a couple of other ones we're going to be doing for hooks, etc. So yeah, that's about it. What else can we discuss? I think we've covered most things. If you guys have any questions, please let me know, because this is quite a lot. We've covered quite a lot, and I'm sure you guys are confused. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. No questions? Could I explain what states are? Sure, I'll explain what states are. This is a bit of a bit more of a complex topic, which I'm going to actually cover later on, but I can start right now. States are basically, if you have a functional component. So let's suppose, so for example, actually, let me just run my app and actually show you in real time so you can see what a state is. Let me assign a value but never used. Okay, let me do md and start. Okay. Yeah, so let me stop running the sport. ctrl-c. Okay, it's running this. Okay, let's go to the login. It's the login page. Okay, so this is one of the apps that I've actually made myself, right? And as you can see over here, there's a login page, which is this whole thing is a component. And when you're working with components, your question exactly was, could you explain what states are, right? So when you're working with components, now because you might be entering data to a form, etc., this form actually has a state, right? What state means is that it's holding certain information within itself. So as you write the email address and as you write the password, right, it actually saves the fact that you have, it actually has to remember the fact that you wrote something, because it's going to give you errors based on that. So it has to memorize it. Like currently, these things like for the fact it has a tick mark over here means that it remembers that you selected the doctor icon, right? It has to remember these things. How does it remember these things? It uses state for that. Just to show you what that looks on a code level, is if you go to set state, right? So you have what's called the use state hook. This is part of hook. That's why I wasn't keen on mentioning this according to your question. But just to answer it shortly, you actually the functional component does not store variables normally. You can just do declare variable or like var doctor is equals to fana doctor. If you wanted to store doctors, that you cannot do that. And the reason for that is because the React actually re-renders that function every time it runs. So for example, if while I'm writing this, if I make any change to the state is actually going to re-render itself each time I make that change. So if you just declare a variable normally, it won't save it because that function is going to be recalled every single time. So how is it? So imagine a function that has a variable 5, and then you recall that function again. How is it going to remember that it had a 5 in the previous iteration? It can't remember that. That's why to remember these things, you use something what's called a use state hook. And what that use state hook is basically a fancy way of saying let me remember the state by using an external hook, right? And so instead of using var doctor is equals to doctor something, right? What you're going to do is you're going to do const, and you're going to basically use use state. I just use 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 state snippet, use state snippet. You're going to const doctor, and it's going to have a set doctor for that, and then you want to write the initial value of that variable. So it's basically the same thing as this, but instead of writing it as that, it's gonna write it like this. Just a different way of writing it, but now it remembers that there's a doctor with a specific value in the starting, and if you change this value, it's going to remember it. This is essentially what state is. So state is just saying remember variable. That's essentially what state is saying. It's equivalent of in a Java function. If it remembers what the current number is or what a current int is, it's the exact same thing. But then state management becomes a lot more complex because you want to share this data between multiple components. So for example, if you wanted to pass this from the style component and you wanted it to log in over here, and you wanted to suppose display it over here in your login menu, then it's very difficult to share that state across different places because it's within this component, not within that component. So how do you share it? And there are two ways to do that. One is to lift the state up to a parent, and that's one way, which I'll show in the next session. And the second way, which is the proper way, is to use Redux, right? Or any state management API. There's Redux, there's Modex, there's context APIs. You can use any one of those. And what they basically allow you to do is instead of storing your state within the functional component itself, so for example, instead of storing your state over here in this email bar, it says store your state in the entire app. So anyone who wants to use it does not have to specifically access the form. They can access anything else and they'll be able to use it. So that's what state is. And I hope that answers your question. So other than that, do we have any other questions?
Hi, I have a question.
Sure, sure.
Um, I'm already using React and I'm quite fond with it. I also have my own portfolio here. I actually share it here. Um,
Sure,
a
sure.
common error that I always face is when I'm using an anchor tag, right? Like to pass on a link. I commonly find an error for ESLint error. Normally, a solution to that I found was to actually disable that ESLint error while writing it. But I find out that that's actually not good practice. So normally,
Hmm.
how do you solve that sort of error?
So could you tell me the exact error? You place an anchor tag, sorry?
Yeah, an anchor tag, a tag, like in HTML, you use a tag to pass on a link, right? Like if you click on a link,
Yeah, so
uh,
you're saying that if I write that over here, you're saying it gives a problem? Is
yeah,
that
it
what
gives
you're
a
saying?
ESLint error.
Let me just try that out just to see what it's actually saying. What actually does that? Let's see text field. Let me just label this text. Uh, A, right?
Right.
Parsing error. Should happen in closing tag. You took it all and the direction. Command P. Let's go into the file. Let's go to doctors, doctor.csx, doctor box. Okay, let's put this over here. So A anchors must have content, and the content must be accessible by a screen reader. So right, if you write something like is required for an anchor to be keyword accessible, provide a variable. So basically, I'll tell you, Hassan, the reason for this is probably, I'm guessing, I don't know the exact name, but the use of simplified tags like A is generally not encouraged in React because you already have alternatives to those that are much, much more better. These A tags are basically very old HTML tags that people still use, and they're very functional. But why would you use an A tag but when you can have a link tag instead? You know that might link you to something, and that might
Right.
have the appropriate things and would work exactly as you might want it, right? As you might want to use it. So you can put the href, etc., etc. So I think it depends on your use case exactly. But if you have error like that, just for an A tag and you want to disable it, generally, if you just click on quick fix, it shows you a disable ESLint for that specific error. So you can do that. But generally, the thing that ESLint encourages are there so that you follow good practices. So if you're disabling ESLint, that basically means you're using something as a bad practice. And because ESLint was screaming at you, you said, let's just tell ESLint to shut up. So it's not a good idea to do that, because ESLint is generally pretty smart. And when he says something, it's usually a very good idea. So for
Right.
example, if you use ESLint over here, and you have props over here, it's going to say do not use array indexing keys. Now this code, it works perfectly fine. This code has no errors. The code that I'm showing on the screen, it has 0 errors, and it actually will work perfectly well. In certain scenarios, this code will break. Those are very rare scenarios; they will very rarely occur, but those can occur. And the whole point of ESLint is that ESLint is going to warn you beforehand, before the scenarios occur. So you want to, so fixing these errors doesn't feel like a good idea, but in the long term, when you're working professionally, you really need to fix them. So that's my answer to that.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. किसी और को कोई सवाल है तो बता दे, because the session is about to end. We end at 9:45, and I'm sure you guys must have questions. I was very confused when I first started using React. So if you guys aren't confused, you guys have to be really smart. Props are properties you pass on in the components. Yeah, exactly. Props are exactly like properties you want to pass on in the components. And just to show you what an example prop looks like, this is a doctor card component. And just to show you what a doctor card component is, it's basically a component that makes one card for a doctor. So you can see kind of it's pretty big, right? It's not a small component. And this is just one card. So let me just actually display to you what it looks like. So this is here. Just go to localhost 3000. Clicking. I have to set node server. Give me a second. Give me a second. CD server node mon server.js node mon. Okay, so we've got this server up and running. Okay, so this is basically a bunch of card components for doctors. I hope you guys can see my screen. And the interesting thing you notice is that there are a lot of them, and they're all based on one primary component, which is called the doctor card component. So the doctor card component is over here, and as you can see, it's a pretty big component. It's a pretty big component. It's got a lot of things within it, and it's got a lot of things that's using. And the way it's made is that it's dynamic, so that the doctor properties itself, so the component has a lot of things that are common within it. All the components have these things that are common in it: all the layout, the shadows, the white color, the theme, the fact that there's an icon over here, right, etc., etc. But the one thing they do have that's very interesting is they all have different names themselves. So you notice this guy's Ed Gleason, this guy's Kay Becker, this guy's Edmund Haley. And you'll be thinking, okay, how did that happen? How did that happen that you have a lot of code that's the same, but that you have certain things that are different? And the reason that happened is that the variable things, the things that tend to change, you can pass them as properties from the parent component. So for over here, if in the doctors.jsx file, I'm actually calling a map function, which basically says take that array, and then for each element within that array, call a React component with that specific element in the array. So for example, if you have 1,000 elements, you can basically say, call this exact component 1,000 times, but each time pass a different doctor record as the input. So you have 1,000 different components that are made instantly. This would be very difficult to make in HTML, in fact, almost impossible probably, because you would have to hard code them manually. This was literally one line, which is essentially the power of React. And exactly why the props is so useful. That's why property is so useful, because the parent component passed them down based on its array, and then the child component just used those values and made different outputs for each one of the instances, right? So yeah, I hope that answered your question. And yeah, I think that's about it.